Hi, you're watching the IT Taster channel, and in this video I'm going to show you how to install and configure the DHCP server role within Microsoft Windows Server 2019. Now, DHCP, or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, is a really important and useful tool for network admins and sysadmins alike because it enables them to centrally manage their IP addressing and assign IP addresses to network devices. Now, the chances are you've probably worked with DHCP already. You've maybe configured a home router or some other network appliance. And one thing I find particularly interesting when working with students who are studying their CCNA is that they also will have been working with DHCP, but mainly from configuring Cisco routers. Now, when they come to work with Windows Server, they have that light bulb moment. They actually realize what an important and useful tool DHCP is within Microsoft Windows. And hopefully that's something that you'll also get from watching this video. So with that said, don't forget to give the video a like if you did find it useful, and drop a comment on your thoughts below. Also, if you haven't already, please remember to subscribe to the IT Taster channel. And I'm also around on social media too, and I'll leave the links below in the video description. So with that said, let's get started. So this is a diagram of the lab setup and also the configuration that I intend to use for my DHCP server in this video. So starting with the server, our server is of course running Microsoft Windows Server 2019. Server's host name is Server 1. It's a domain controller, so it's running the Active Directory Domain Services role. Its IP address is 192.168.1.101. It has a default Class C subnet mask. I've also configured a gateway, which is my router. And my Active Directory domain name, my fully qualified Active Directory domain name, is training.ittaster.com. And the server is also a DNS server. It's running an Active Directory integrated DNS server role. Now over here is the configuration that I intend to use for my client devices. The IP range is the range of addresses that will be available for my client devices. And that range starts at 192.168.1.200 to 192.168.1.250. Now this is quite a small range, but I've chosen this purely for the lab environment. We would use something quite different in a production environment. Now my client devices will also need to use the same default Class C subnet mask as my server. And I'm also going to exclude a range of addresses as well. I'm going to exclude the range beginning at 192.168.1.200 to 192.168.1.209. So I'm actually going to exclude the first 10 IP addresses from our IP address range so that they won't be given out to client devices. Now the reason we might want to do that is if we have devices with static IP addresses, for example network printers, or maybe servers, or network switches that fall within the beginning of our IP address range. Now I'm also going to issue my client devices with the default gateway. And very importantly, in an Active Directory domain, we want our Windows devices to know the IP address of our DNS server, which is 192.168.1.101. So let's now go over to the server and get started. So let's begin by logging into our server in the lab. Server Manager of course starts by default. So the first thing I want to do is install the DHCP server role. So to do that we need to click on Manage, click Add Roles and Features. The first screen basically just tells us what the Add Roles and Features wizard does, so we can simply click Next. We need to select a role or feature-based installation and click Next. Server Manager is designed to manage multiple servers, but I only have the one server in the lab, Server 1, which is already selected, so I can simply click Next. I need to select the DHCP server role and add features. Now the wizard also shows us the destination server, the server that we're installing the role on, which is very useful when we are working with multiple servers because we can just double check to make sure we're installing the role on the correct server. I can simply click next, next again. This screen gives us a useful overview of what DHCP does. It reminds us that we should configure at least one static IP address on our server, and also to plan out our DHCP server, things like subnets, our IP addressing, our scopes, and exclusions, just as we did in the initial lab diagram. And click next. I normally tick restart the destination server automatically in the lab, and click install. The installation process is going to take a little while, so I'm going to leave it to run and come back to it when it's completed. The installation process is completed, so the next thing I need to do is click Complete DHCP Configuration. Here it tells us that the server is going to create a couple of security groups, one called DHCP Administrators and DHCP Users. And more importantly, we need to authorize the DHCP server. This authorizes our DHCP server in Active Directory to prevent rogue DHCP servers coming online. And click Next. I need to specify the credentials to authorize the DHCP server in Active Directory. And I'm going to stick with my training domain administrator account and click Commit. Here I need to click Close, and the process is completed. Now normally you can continue from here, but I like to give the server a reboot to make sure everything restarts again and we have a nice clean installation. So I'm just going to restart the server and we'll rejoin the video when the server's restarted. The server's restarted, I've logged back in and we're back in Server Manager. And you'll notice we now have a DHCP server tile under Roles and Server Groups. So next thing I want to do is configure DHCP. So to do that, I'm going to click Tools and I'm going to click DHCP. Just going to expand this a little so we can see what we're doing. And expand the server. Now I'm mainly going to be working with IP version 4 addresses in this video. So the first thing I want to do is configure my DHCP server scope. So to do that, I need to right click the IP version 4 icon there and choose New Scope. Click Next. And I need to give the scope a name. I'm going to call it Scope 1. And click Next. And I need to specify the range of addresses that I'm going to give out to my client devices. So I'm going to follow our configuration from our lab diagram. So the starting IP address is 192.168.1.200 to 192.168.1.250. Now you'll notice that the server's automatically calculated our subnet mask for us. So I can simply click Next. The next thing I need to do is add any exclusion ranges. Remember, we want to specify an exclusion range for the first 10 IP addresses, which we outlined in our lab diagram, which is 192.168.1.200 to 192.168.1.209. Click Add and click Next. Now the least duration basically specifies the amount of time a client device will hang on to an IP address before it queries the DNS server to check that it can continue to use that address. Now this screen also gives us some useful advice. It tells us that least duration should typically be equal to the average time the computer is connected to the same physical network. And particularly mobile devices that may come in and out may need a shorter lease time, so it's something that you may need to consider. I'm going to stick with the default of 8 days and click Next. Next, we need to configure our DHCP options. Remember, DHCP options are additional configuration settings that we can give to our client devices. So I need to click Next. And the first setting is we're allowed to specify a router, a default gateway, which I'm going to choose 192.168.1.254 and click Add and Next. I can also specify the Active Directory fully qualified domain name to issue to our client devices as well, which is training.ittaster.com. And you'll notice this is automatically being added for us, as well as the Active Directory integrated DNS server, our domain controller, which is 192.168.1.101. All I need to do here is click Next. Now, WINS isn't something that is used that much these days. It's a sort of a much older predecessor to DNS. It stands for Windows Internet Naming Service, and it was used for resolution NetBIOS names to IP addresses. But I'm going to leave this blank because I don't need it. There are some devices, possibly Linux appliances, that may still use it, but for our Windows 2019 network and our Windows 10 clients, we don't need to use WINS, so I'm going to leave this blank and click Next. And the last thing I need to do is activate my DHCP scope, so I'm going to leave Yes selected and click Next. And we can click Finish. Now that that's done, I'm going to refresh IP version 4. And I'm going to expand my DHCP scope. If I click on Address Pool, we can see our IP address range that will be assigned to our client devices, and also the exclusion range that will not be assigned to client devices. And this doesn't have to run from the very beginning of our IP address range. You can have multiple exclusions wherever you like, basically. Now, if I click on Address Leases, at the moment that's blank. We don't have any devices leasing any IP addresses at this moment. And if I click on Scope Options, we can see the scope options that we set. We configured a router, we configured our DNS servers, and we also configured a DNS domain name as well. But there are lots of options, and if you right click on Scope Options and click Configure Options, there are all sorts of other things that you can add, such as a time server, and as you can see, there are many other options. I'm going to stick with the scope options that we have already. I'm not going to make any changes there at this moment. So next thing I'm going to do is log on to a Windows client PC so that we can take a look at how DHCP is working on the client itself. I've powered up my Windows 10 workstation in the lab and I've logged into it. Next thing I want to do is check my network adapter settings. I'm going to open Network and Internet Settings, go to my Network and Sharing Center, change adapter settings, right click my Ethernet adapter and choose Properties, and double click IP version 4. Now, as you can see, my network adapter is set to obtain an IP address automatically from DHCP. And the network adapter is also set to obtain DNS server address settings automatically too, which is what I want. So I can click OK and close this down. The next thing I'm going to do is open up a command prompt. I'm going to type ipconfig /all, so I can take a closer look at my Ethernet adapter settings. Now, the first thing to notice is my IP version 4 address of 192.168.1.210. If you remember, we excluded the first 10 IP addresses from our DHCP server range. We've also got our default Class C subnet mask. We can see when our lease was obtained and when our DHCP lease will run out. We can also notice a couple of DHCP server options that we set. Our default gateway, our router, which is 192.168.1.254, and also the DHCP server itself, 192.168.1.101. And we can also see our DNS server setting, 192.168.1.101. And if you remember, we also configured our Active Directory fully qualified DNS domain name of training.ittaster.com, which we can see here. The next thing I want to do is go back over to the server because there's one last thing that I want to show you over there. I'm back on the Windows 2019 server and I'm in DHCP where we left off. Now, the last thing I want to quickly show you is address leases. I'm just going to do a quick refresh by right-clicking address leases and choosing refresh. And if we click address leases, in here we'll be able to see the client IP addresses of all of the devices that are assigned an IP address by DHCP. Now, I've only got the one Windows 10 workstation in the lab, which we can see here, and it's assigned the IP address of 192.168.1.210. We can also see its host name as well. If I expand that a little bit, we can also see the domain name training.ittaster.com. We can also see when the lease expires as well, and this can be particularly useful. Now, I find that the address leases is a really useful function because it enables network administrators and system admins to keep a track of all of our devices that are assigned IP addresses by the DHCP server. Well, that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. And hopefully it's also given you an idea of how useful and what a powerful tool DHCP is. And you're now going to go away and play around with DHCP in your home labs too. So with that said, please give the video a like. Don't forget, drop a comment below. Let me know if you enjoyed it and your own experiences with DHCP. Hit subscribe to the IT Taster channel if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.